Good evening. Good evening. Thank you. My name is Jean Quam, and I'm the Dean of the College of Education and Human Development, and on behalf of the Tucker Center for Research on Girls and Women in Sport, which is proudly housed in our college, it is, yeah. It's my pleasure to welcome you to this fall distinguished lecture, and I want to thank each and every one of you for being here. Many of you may know that the Tucker Center was established in 1993 with a generous gift from Dr. Dorothy Tucker, who was a 1945 graduate of the U of M in the School of Kinesiology. That was 75 years ago. Some of us had the pleasure of getting to meet Dorothy, and I have a feeling, having met Dorothy, and Nicole and I were down there, I think, the last time together, she's here, and she's loving every minute of this. The Tucker Center was the first interdisciplinary research center established within a major research university on this topic. Dorothy realized the critical importance of creating a robust, cutting-edge research center to advance the broader goals of the University of Minnesota. So the Tucker Center has a threefold mission: to conduct research on the impact of sport in the lives of girls and women, to provide first-rate educational opportunities for both graduate and undergraduate students, and 3, to engage in community outreach and public service. This distinguished lecture series brings all parts of that mission together by creating a forum that allows the best and the brightest to share their insights, knowledge, and experience on various aspects of women's involvement in sport and physical activity. And I think many of us have had the opportunity to hear many of those lectures over the years. Tonight's event is no exception, as we will honor the founder and the first director of the Tucker Center, Professor Mary Jo Kane. In CEHD, we have a theme for our incoming freshmen, and the theme is, can one person make a difference? And we think that's a very important thing, a very important message to give to our first-year students. It's a message that Mary Jo has personified, and we're going to hear a lot more about it tonight. So I thought what to say about Mary Jo. Some of us were having fun before we came over here tonight, thinking about how we could throw in a question that might stump her. And we tried to get Shari to think about how we could do that. However, we all decided that no matter what we ask her, she would sit up straight and with great authority answer it however she wanted to. And we would all be left scratching our heads trying to decide whether or not what she said was actually right. Right. Yeah, do not argue with Mary Jo. So the only way to do her justice is really to let us hear from her herself. She's the most quotable faculty I believe I've had in the college. She has frequently been interviewed for popular press and magazines, as well as research journals, newspapers. She can talk about all kinds of things to all kinds of people and do it with passion. Most of all, I believe that she believes passionately in her work. Passion is a theme that comes through. She cares deeply about advancing this work for future generations. And you'll have a chance to hear more of that for yourself. But before we get to honoring Professor Kane, every fall we give out an important scholarship that will be presented by Dr. Beth Lewis, who is director of the School of Kinesiology.
Good evening. Edith Mueller was a student in the Recreation, Park, and Leisure Studies program until her untimely death in 1982. A scholarship was created in her memory by her family to help support other students pursuing a degree and career in recreation. Every year, we honor the Mueller family at this event and are pleased to have Edith's mother, Mike, and sister Carrie here with us tonight. I think you're way in the back. Yes. Way in the back. So this year's recipient is Grace Moen, who is a third-year undergraduate student pursuing a Bachelor of Science in Recreation Administration. Moen serves as a leader for Young Life College. She enjoys the community she has found through this student group and has learned how important relationships are in leadership. Through her involvement, she has had the opportunity to serve 2 one-month-long volunteer experiences at 2 separate summer camps in the country. After working in these settings, Moen discovered her interest in outdoor recreation, specifically with younger children, and has since focused her recreation on courses in recreation with a youth studies emphasis. This summer, Moen will be working as a waterfront intern at a summer camp in Michigan. That sounds very exciting. Interesting. Here she'll have the opportunity to use her leadership skills to assist in the operation of waterfront and learn more about everyday management of a summer camp. She's an undergraduate in the Recreation Administration program under the advisement of Dr. Connie Magnuson. Congratulations. Okay, next I'm going to introduce Dr. Nicole Lavoie before we get to the panel. Dr. Nicole Lavoie is the director of the Tucker Center and is a senior lecturer in the School of Kinesiology in the area of social and behavioral sciences in the School of Kinesiology. Dr. Lavoie is a leading international scholar on gender, leadership, and women coaches, publishing frequently across multiple disciplines. Her seminal work includes the annual Women in College Coaching Report Card, which I'm sure many of you have seen, which is aimed at retaining and increasing the number of women in the coaching profession, and a best-selling author of the book Women in Coaching. Together with her colleagues, she has helped produce 3 Emmy-nominated documentaries with Twin Cities Public Television, Minnesota, winning an Emmy in 2014 on important topics related to girls and women in sport. Dr. Lavoie was given the CHD Distinguished Teaching Award for exceptional teaching and commitment to students in the classroom. As a public scholar, she speaks frequently around the world, hosts a podcast, which is great, and serves on numerous national advisory boards. Please welcome Dr. Lavoie.
Thank you. Good evening, everybody. Thank you all for being here to celebrate and honor my colleague, the founder and the first director of the Tucker Center, Professor Mary Jo Kane. It means a great deal to her and to me. Now, when we were planning the Fall Distinguished Lecture, as we do every summer, we like to bring the best and the brightest in to talk about topics that are cutting edge to women in sport. And we suggested that we feature Professor Kane as a way to honor and celebrate her career and a scholar and teacher and advocate and a pioneer around girls and women in sport. Well, we were met with a little reluctance and resistance. However, with some evidence-based arguments, with some sound reasoning, some gentle but firm arm twisting, and expert persuasion skills, all things that I learned from Mary Jo herself, she relented. We promised her she would not have to stand up at the podium and read findings from her manuscripts, which are many and piles of manuscripts. Of note, though, some of you don't know, in 1985, Professor Kane published her first paper titled Environmental Aspects of Children's Play, where she argued that stereotype play based on what was feminine or masculine limited a child's full potential and expression of self. It's been many since. Now, I thought I could bring a big pile of them in and, go through them, but with manuscripts aside, For tonight, we thought it would be much more interesting to hear directly from her in a conversational storytelling format. A hallmark that someone is beloved are a plethora of nicknames. So as we have many honored guests in the audience tonight from all different areas of her life, tonight, Professor Kane, also known as Mary Jo, Dr. Kane, JoJo, Citizen Kane, the Kane, Boss Lady, Big Boss, I'm the little boss, Dr. Mojo, or simply MJK. She will share with us some memories and highlights along the arc of her groundbreaking 30-plus year career in the Academy. And to guide the conversation tonight, it is my pleasure to welcome to the stage and to introduce Shari Ballard. Shari is a seasoned executive with more than 25 years of deep retail experience. She's the former senior executive vice president and president of multi-channel retail at Best Buy and serves as the vice chair of the University of Minnesota's Foundation Board of Trustees and also a member of the board of directors at Ecolab. She began her career at Best Buy. I love this part of her bio. She, as an assistant store manager, and rose up through the ranks to lead at the highest levels. Ballard has been listed as Fortune magazine's most powerful women in business numerous times, and Fortune has cited her leadership at Best Buy as an essential component in, quote, one of the most impressive turnarounds in retail over the last decade. There's no better person to facilitate tonight in what we have fondly, I think, and appropriately dubbed Ballard on Kane. Please again help me welcome Shari. Okay, not that Professor Kane actually needs an introduction, but given this will be her last such official role at a Tucker Center Distinguished Lecture, please indulge me. Do you want to come on stage? Professor Mary Jo Kane. Mary Jo Kane is a professor in the School of Kinesiology and an internationally recognized scholar. She's published extensively on media representations of women's sports, and her work was the reason why we won that Emmy on media coverage in female athletes. She was the recipient of the first endowed chair in the nation, and I think I would say actually in the world, related to women in sport, the Dorothy McNeil Tucker Chair of Women in Sport and Exercise. Professor Kane is also a fellow in the National Academy of Kinesiology, which is one of the highest honors in our discipline. She's a past recipient of the Scholar of the Year Award from the Women's Sport Foundation, our advocacy sisters in women in sport. And in 2018, she was named the 100 most influential sport educators by the Institute for International Sport. Over the past 3 decades, her scholarship, teaching, mentoring, and community outreach have shaped and changed the landscape for sportswomen. And her contributions throughout have influenced countless stakeholders, many of whom are in the room, who advocate for gender equity. Please join me in welcoming the Tucker Center's founder, a woman who has lived the mission by literally making a difference in the lives of girls and women in sport, Professor Mary Jo Kane.
I have to pull this chair up a little bit. Not that I need to micromanage anything.
just so you all know, but you probably already have a sense of this, this was on a number of occasions as we were preparing. It felt much more like Kane on Kane than it did Kane on Ballard. She likes to kind of direct things, as you all might have a sense. Are you ready to go?
Yeah, I'm ready to go. You ready to go?
I am.
Okay.
So, as you heard a little bit in my introduction, I am not a professional interviewer for a living. However, I could not love Mary Jo Kane more, and I have grown to love the University of Minnesota and the work you and your team have done here, and the room is full of a whole bunch of people who feel the same way. So we're going to try to have a little bit of fun and give Mary Jo a chance to tell what's been an absolutely remarkable story of her life and her work, and let you all who haven't seen every single part of it get a sense of it. Because I'm not entirely confident in doing that, I'll cover everything that's on your guys' mind. We got time at the end for Q&A. So I'll go through, try to give Mary Jo a chance to tell all aspects of the story. But then we'll give the floor to you all before we do closing comments today. So anybody who has questions, we'll have a chance to ask you that. Okay? So let's get going. I know we'll spend probably a lot of the time, obviously, talking about your career and your research in the Tucker Center and give you a chance to tell the story. But I'd actually rather start, if we could, in Bloomington, Illinois in the 1950s and 60s, which is where Mary Jo grew up. Talk about that a little bit. Just what was it like to grow up there, and kind of give us the context and the sense of that.
Okay, I was born in 1951, and I grew up in, and I know some of you will appreciate this, in a very intensely tribal Irish Catholic community. I started out in kindergarten. Well, I went kindergarten through senior and high school, being raised by Dominican nuns. They were a tough group, but I have to say I owe everything to them in terms of my foundation, both in terms of my educational foundation and, quite frankly, a moral compass that I was given by the nuns and my family and my neighborhood in Bloomington, Illinois on Fell Avenue, and I'm delighted and honored that some of the people that I grew up with are here tonight from Bloomington, Illinois. I started out in kindergarten. There were 103 people in my graduating class from high school, and about 96 of us, we just had our 50th high school reunion, 96 of us started out together in kindergarten and went all the way through. And I didn't realize it at the time, I mean, you are an individual, you're Mary Jo Kane, but what you also really are is you're a Kane, or a Brady, or an O'Brien, or a King. That's who you are, and that's your identity. And my brothers and sisters were in the classes with the people who I was in class with. Our parents, we all lived in the same neighborhood. Our parents played bridge together, and it was an extraordinary way to grow up. I have two aunts who are no longer here. One, my father's older sisters, Mary and Josephine, and Mary Kane was tough Irish, first generation. And she always said to me, in fact, the last thing she said to me before she died was, never forget who you are and never forget where you're from. And that has guided me my whole life.
What sparked your interest in sports?
My family. We loved sports. We loved all kinds of sports. I was the classic pre-Title IX neighborhood tomboy who played football, basketball, and baseball with my two brothers and the neighborhood boys. And Kevin Brady, who's here tonight from Bloomington, Illinois, knows a lot about that. And also because it was in the Midwest and we cared deeply about education, the University of Notre Dame was kind of a beacon out there as an institution of higher education and learning. But most importantly, the commitment there, or the interest there, was Notre Dame football. And I like to point that out to Shari Ballard, who's a big
she got
Michigan
that in early
fan.
and often.
She's a big Michigan fan. We'll see how that works out in a couple of weeks. Anyway, my family, because again we were Irish Catholic, we looked to Notre Dame. My family was lucky enough to have season tickets to Notre Dame football, where I have gone every year since I was a little girl. And we loved sports. I loved playing sports. I loved watching sports. I still do.
So you mentioned pre-Title IX.
Yeah.
I mean, for those of us who grew up post-Title IX and had our own experience enjoying sports and had access to playing sports. Talk a little bit about pre-Title IX, and you just talked about all the sports you love. Like, what sports did you play? Did you have access to? Did you not have access to? Give us a sense of that.
Well, I played, so my family lived across the street from what was called Fell Avenue Playground, which was kind of a classic parks and recreation facility and field. And so I played tag football, tackle football, wiffle ball, baseball, basketball. I played all kinds of sports with my two brothers and the neighborhood guys. But there were no formal activities for me as a pre-Title IX girl, and certainly not in a small Catholic private school. And so then, I remember we didn't have junior high, so it was 1st through 8th grade, and then you go to high school in 9th grade. And I remember it was just one of the few sort of introspective moments that I had, because one doesn't think about this as you're growing up. But graduating from 8th grade and knowing I was going to have to go into high school and thinking, nobody told me this, Shari, but I just knew that it was not going to be okay for me to be a freshman in high school and come home after school and play tackle football with my brothers and the neighborhood guys. I knew that I had to become a girl and start thinking about things like homecoming. And so I did what a lot of young women of my age did. I became a cheerleader. And I was a complete disaster. How many of you were cheerleaders? Raise your hand, come on. Oh, yeah, see, more than you think. And I was a disaster in part because, first of all, I wasn't any good. But secondly, because when you're a cheerleader, your back is always to the action, or often to the action. And I wanted to sit in the stands and call the plays. Oh, okay. Yeah. I also should have told you that I was the second of 4 children. And there is my brother David looking at me intently reading, which I don't remember this photo session, but I do remember the book, which is Pokey's Little Puppy. And my younger sister Janie obviously couldn't have been less interested in what I had to say. And then that's my older brother Johnny looking down. It's interesting, as I gave that picture, I'm the only brunette in that picture. Everybody else is a blonde. Anyway, we won't go down that rabbit hole. Anyway, but yeah, that's those are my siblings, David and Janie and Johnny.
And your love of calling the plays, I can actually attest, many of you probably can, still exists today. She's actually, I've sat next to you during a lot of football games. She's actually quite good. Believes the tight end is completely underutilized, and the little dink pass over the middle should happen more often.
Always.
Yes, I think that's kind of the thing.
Trust me, it'll work every time.
So after you went to college
Yeah.
and got your undergraduate degree, and then you went to the University of Illinois to get your PhD.
Right.
So at that point, did you have a sense that you were going to have a life full of interest and career in women in sport, or how did you think about that at that point in time?
I was in Champaign, Illinois at the time, and I really didn't know what I wanted to do. And so I did what a lot of people do when they don't really know what they want to do, which is, I'll go to graduate school. Why not? And I was aware that at the University of Illinois at that time, there was a new academic focus or interest called sports sociology. There was also sports psychology, but sociology, my undergraduate degree was in sociology. And I was super interested in sociology, large, broad, structural, institutional concerns. And I cared a lot about sports, and I cared a lot about feminist analysis of sports. And so when I heard that there was this new academic major at the University of Illinois where one could get a degree in something called, or at least a sub-major in sports sociology, I was like, I got to check this out. And I was lucky enough that some of the founding fathers and mothers of the discipline were at the University of Illinois, and I started taking classes from them, and I got a fabulous education. And as I took more and more courses, I thought, I think I would really like to do this. I would like to do, I thought the idea of teaching was okay, but what I really wanted to do was research. And because Illinois was a Research One university like Minnesota, I absolutely landed in the right place.
So you just referenced Minnesota. So you came to Minnesota in 1989?
Yes.
So what and or who brought you, I mean, how'd you get here?
Well, my former department chair, Mike Wade, who I want to give a lot of kudos to, he was a faculty member at the University of Illinois when I was getting my degree, and then he was recruited to come here. I'm looking at President Brunix. He came here to become a department chair in the School of Kinesiology under you, right? I mean, you recruited him, or?
No, I didn't recruit him. We were fellow chairs together.
Oh, you were, okay, you in Ed Psych. So Mike recruited me to come here. And I was very interested in staying. I'm a Midwesterner. I love the Midwest. I'd heard really great things about the University of Minnesota, both in terms of our department and what a great academic department it was here. But the other reason that I was here, and I want to give a particular shout out, again, I was interested in feminist research, and the University of Minnesota was legendary for its community of scholars in women's studies. There was absolutely, I mean, the pioneers who built the academic discipline of women's studies was at the University of Minnesota. And I knew a lot of their work. Some of them are here tonight. And I just was like over the moon to think I could come to a place like Minnesota, and hoped that not only would my department be interested in the work I was doing, but also women's studies. I very much wanted to be a part of that community.
Did it feel like a fit right away? Or was it, one of those scenarios where you kind of have to work your way to find community?
Well, I felt a fit in our department right away because people were so engaging and supportive. And the college was certainly supportive, especially under Bob Brunix, who then became the dean. But again, my research is on sport and gender, and even though it is from a feminist analysis, it's still about sport, and we're talking 1989. And so the folks in women's studies weren't, I mean, that wasn't exactly, I'm looking at the women's studies people, they didn't exactly do sport and gender. And so I was concerned that that I, not marginalized, but like, okay, sport and gender,
right.
that's sweet and nice, but really that's not really the core of what we're doing.
Right.
And I was just completely accepted early on, particularly by a dear friend of mine, and a lot of you in the audience will know who is no longer here. Her name is Janet Spector. And who was a feminist archaeologist, and I think the first woman at this university to get tenure in the anthropology department, and I'm looking at, it's pretty close. So Janet and Susan Geiger, her partner, they just put their arms around me, as did women's studies, and in fact, the first class I taught here was sport and gender, which was in Fort Hall, which was cross-listed with women's studies, and that was a real marker and a milestone for me of acceptance.
That's great, thank you.
Yeah.
So if we fast forward to 1993 and the Tucker Center, the year the Tucker Center is born,
Yeah.
I think probably most people, I mean, at this point we know what it is, but don't really probably have a sense of, like, how did you give birth to the Tucker Center? Like, how did it happen? And people may or may not know. I mean, it's still,
Yeah.
It was then, it still is now, the only thing like it in the nation.
Yeah.
So how did it start?
It's an extraordinary story, and I feel really privileged that I have the opportunity to share it, because people have heard about the Tucker Center but don't necessarily know how it started. And to go back to my Catholic childhood, in many ways it was sort of my guardian angel story. But so there were two parallel things that were going on in my life. So as Dr. Lavoie mentioned, I was doing, the research that I was focused on was media coverage of female athletes. And I literally started out early in my career with a slide projector with slides. And I would go all over the country and also all over the state of Minnesota. And again, this is 1989. I'm new to sort of, I want to say this as politely as I can.
You know there were computers then, right?
Were there? Are you sure? Okay. Good point. Well, she works at Best Buy. It's her job.
I'm sorry, back to your slideshow.
Yeah. So I was new to Minnesota, and I mean this with great respect, but I hadn't quite internalized yet Scandinavian culture. And I say that because, I can be pretty good at reading an audience, and I was pretty used to going out and having people either really like what I was saying or being, kind of hostile to what I was saying, which is, you know, female athletes should not be sexualized. This is not a good idea. It's not true that sex sells women's sports. We don't have any data. Anyway, so I'm in the Iron Range, and I'm giving a talk to a group of mostly women that I have been told are going to be sort of supportive to my message. And I go through the images of comparing how female athletes are sexualized and what that feels like versus when they're portrayed as on court and competent. But I'm not getting anything. I mean, people are polite, but they're quiet, and they're just, you know, they're like flatliners, you know. And I'm like, okay, well, what do you think we should do now? So I finished, you know, the show must go on. And I said, are there any questions? And there was a woman who stood up in the audience in the back, and she said, yeah, I have a question, Dr. Kane. I very much agree with what you had to say, and I appreciate it for bringing this to our attention. Here's my question. So what are we going to do about it? And as a faculty member, I was like a deer in headlights. I was like, what are we going to do about it? I can tell you what the problem is, but I don't have any idea about what we should do about it or how, what are we gonna, I mean, I don't know, you're fat, you laugh, because, you know, we're not trained to know how to do anything about it. This is clearly not a dirty little secret, you all know this. So I remember driving home from the Iron Range thinking, that's a really good question. We ought to do something about it. We really ought to do something about it. And I'm at a place like the University of Minnesota, which would do something about it. So that was sort of around in the back of my head. Now it's 1992, and I had just gotten tenure, and it was the 20th anniversary of Title IX. And women's participation rates are exploding. And after decades of being told girls aren't interested in sports or wouldn't be any good if they played sports, we, as you know, we built them ballparks and ice rinks and playing fields all over this country, and it just blew through the doors. But as a scholar and an educator, and one of the people who did research in this area, I was very aware of the fact that the research was not keeping pace with what this participation meant. And I would go to academic conferences, and people would be making pronouncements, and I would think about what it meant, from exercise science to the social sciences. And I remembered thinking, we might have an isolated study here of that, but we don't know that. And I was concerned that we were going to start to do what has happened in the medical field, and some of my best friends are doctors, medical doctors. Maybe
Steady
not after
yourselves,
what I'm
ladies.
where, you know, there would be this sort of sense about, well, we'll just add women and stir, right? So that we would assume that what we knew in the medical profession about men, we would just automatically transfer to women, and that we found out wasn't always the case. I mean, maybe it was, but the point is it was an empirical question that needed to be addressed. And so that was also rolling around in the back of my head. Okay, fast forward to a faculty meeting in 1992 in our department, and a development officer from the college. And by the way, at that time, I didn't know what a development officer was. I didn't know what the foundation was. I didn't. I had no idea what the University of Minnesota Foundation was. Anyway, he comes to a meeting and he says, any faculty here have any ideas that might interest donors? And I said, I have a great idea. What we need is a center inside of a Research One university that takes seriously the notion of the scientific analysis of what it means for girls and women in sports, from exercise science to the social sciences. That needs to happen to keep pace, and Minnesota would be a great place. Anyway, fast forward, we have lunch. It's clear that he wants me to help, you know, raise money, and I'm like, I don't want to raise money. I'm a faculty, I just got tenure. I want to be a full professor, which means I have to keep publishing, and plus that's what I wanted to do. And frankly, as we all know, as I just told you, that's the only thing that I knew how to do. Okay, so anyway, so to make a very long story short, he was a fabulous development officer, and he's getting ready to go off to a development officers conference in San Antonio, Texas. And he goes into the database of the college, and he finds this name of this woman named Dorothy Tucker, who was a 1945 graduate of our department. And from 1945 to 1992, where we are, as President Brunix mentioned last week, had given, you know, $200-300 over the years. Not a whole lot of money, but he was you know, an energetic and a smart development officer, and he called on Dorothy Tucker, and he found out that Dorothy Tucker had no children. Her husband had just died. She loved sports, particularly golf, and she had a lot of money. So he had a conversation with her, and he gave her a series of things that people in the college might be interested in. I don't know this at the time, I find out later. And about 3/4 of the way down, one of the initiatives is this notion of a Center for Girls and Women in Sports. And she says to him, "Tell me more." So out of the blue, I get this call from David Madsen, who says, "Hey, just 2 to 3 pages in English. Put your vision and your passion on the page about what you think this needs to be." And so I wrote this proposal, 2 to 3 pages, sent it off into the universe thinking, I mean, we send stuff off into the universe all the time and nothing happens. So I didn't think anything of it. And a few weeks later, he called me back and he said, "This person, her name is Dorothy Tucker, she wants to be a pioneer, she doesn't want to reinvent the wheel. Then you make a big thing in your proposal about it would be the first and only, there's nothing like this anywhere in the world. Is it true that this would be the only one of its kind in the world if she gave money to support it?" And I said, "You can tell this person that if she gives $50 to a Research One university to just look at how sport and physical activity impacts girls and women, she will be a pioneer." And about 2 weeks later, he called me back and he asked me if I was sitting down, and I said, "Yeah." And he said, "Well, this woman has done her homework, and you're absolutely right, and she's decided to give money to start a center." And I said, "How much money?" And he said, "Well, that's why I want to know if are you sitting down?" And I remembered thinking at the time, oh my God, this woman has given us $50,000 and nobody will ever believe my story. In fact, she gave us $1 million to start the Tucker Center, which I think at the time was the largest single gift from an individual donor in the history of the College of Education at the University of Minnesota. So that was a big deal.
She's smiling. So you have the money,
I thought.
and then how do you as you go to try to establish it then?
Yeah.
Easy, hard, talk about establishing, once you kind of put the idea to paper.
So there's all this publicity, the Minnesota Women's Press, the Star Tribune, first and only, the University of Minnesota, totally fabulous. We had a dinner at East Cliff with President Hasselmo. Bob Brunix, who's here, was our dean, and it was love is all around, right? Okay, so now it's August, and we got to start the Tucker Center, right? And so I went to my boss, Mike Wade, department chair, and I said, I can't believe, I said, this is being taped. Anyway, I said, so, because I knew that we needed computers and maybe some stationery and some phone line. I mean, I don't know. So I said to Mike, so is there a checking account somewhere? I mean, do I have a credit card to get access to this money? And he said, what are you talking? You don't have any money. I said, what are you talking about? He said, well, it's an endowment, Mary Jo, which meant nothing to me. And I said, well, what does that mean? And he said, it means you get the interest on the principal when she dies. And I was like, okay, wait a minute. Okay, this is a problem because I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to do this. And I thought, I think I should go talk to my dean, because I had been around Bob Brunix a few times, and I thought to myself, I think he's got a really good future ahead of him. So I make an appointment, and for those of you who, many of you here have worked with Bob Brunix, and I just have to say to you, the thing about Bob Brunix, no matter, and you learn at the feet of the master. I'm looking at some members of his administration, and whether it's TCF Bank Stadium, the Bell Museum, the biomedical area, help me out, you guys, the renovation of Northrop, and I could go on and on and on. Bob always started out with a set of what are our guiding principles, no matter what the initiative is, what are our guiding principles? Okay, so I already know this. So I go in and I meet with then Dean Brunix, and he gives me a big hug. Congratulations, I'm so proud of you. Why are you here? And I said, actually, there's been a terrible mistake. And I tell him what Mike told me, and then I said, so what this means is we have to give the money back. And Bob looked at me and he said, Mary Jo, guiding principle number 1, we never give the money back. It's a true story. And I said, well, okay, but here's the deal. I want to be a full professor. I got to keep publishing. I'm not going to spend my life raising money. So I don't know what we're going to do. And he said, I know what we're going to do. And this is, again, a guardian angel moment, right? Because I've got this guy who becomes the dean and then the provost and the president. He says, and this was in 1993, where $1 million, you know, you got more than $8 on your return on $1 million. And he said, she doesn't need the money. We're going to take half of the interest on the principal, and if she will put that down for 5 years, I will match it from the college. So for the first 5 years, you will have seed money, development money to get the Tucker Center up and running. And had he not said that to me, I do not think, honest to God, do not think we would be here. So thank Bob Brunix.
So you've got the idea.
Yeah,
You've got some money now.
a little bit.
And then, so how do you decide what the Tucker Center is, to the Iron Ring question, how do you decide what the Tucker Center is going to actually do?
The $64,000 question. So now, because of what just happened, we're, you know, I'm like I'm the dog that's caught the bus, which is, how are we going to have a center? I don't know. And I was smart enough to know that when somebody said what Shari just said, which is, what do you do in the Tucker Center? That I had to be able to say more than, would you like to read my most recent manuscript? And so I sat down with Jonathan Sweet, whom you will hear from in a little while, who's been my right-hand person from the very beginning. And I said, what do you think we ought to do, Jonathan? And Jonathan's kind of a community organizer guy. And he said, I think we should have a newsletter. And I was like, okay, that sounds like a good idea. Let's have a newsletter. And then I thought, what should we put in the newsletter, do you think? And as importantly, to whom should we send our newsletter out? We don't have a constituency. I don't know. But we persevered, and we put out our first newsletter in, I think, 1993. Anyway, so we put out a newsletter. And we also developed a distinguished lecture series, which is the first and only one of its kind in the country. And just started to think of initiatives that we could do that would put us on the map and be taken seriously as a research center.
How do you keep it relevant?
How do we keep it relevant? Well, we have a whole network of affiliated scholars, both here at the university and around now the globe. We bring in graduate students who are, I think, some of the best and the brightest to do their own thesis and dissertation on some aspects related to women's sports. And to keep hiring new people. In 2000, related to your question, Shari, in 2005, I agreed to be the department chair, but I said only on the condition that I can hire somebody to come in and run the day-to-day workings of the Tucker Center. And I knew of this person named Nicole Lavoie, who had gotten her PhD in our department, and I knew she too had a bright future, and at the time she was at Notre Dame. So I contacted her. She'd been at Wellesley, and then she went to Notre Dame. And I contacted her and asked her if she would be interested in maybe coming and working in the Tucker Center. But you know, it was a national search, and so I had to interview folks. And so Nicole came in, said she'd be interested. We flew her in. She sat down, you know, and did the old. So Nicole or Dr. Lavoie, if we hired you in the Tucker Center, what would you do to take us to the next level? And she said, well, the first thing I would do is do something about your newsletter. And I said, what's wrong with our newsletter? And she said, it looks like a church bulletin. Are you doing it? Yeah. Well, so it kind of hurt my feelings a little bit because, Jonathan and I, and so I didn't really say anything, and I went back to my office and I thought, well, it actually does look like a church bulletin. She's right. So she came in the next day and I said, Dr. Lavoie, you're right. So here's the deal. What would it look like if I hired you? What would our newsletter look like if you were in charge? So show me what you got. That's what it looks like now. And so it was, I thought, she's a keeper. So yeah, the newsletter.
So we've spent a good chunk of time on the aspect of your role as a scholar and in a Research One institution. Of course, that's an important, really important part. Equally important part, mentoring and teaching. So let's cover that a little bit.
Yeah.
Talk about mentoring graduate students.
Well, and I have to believe that a lot of faculty here feel this way. It is, as a faculty member, especially in a major research university, mentoring graduate students to get their thesis and dissertation, PhD, is one of the most sacred of our obligations. Not just professionally, but really it's a moral obligation, because if you accept a graduate student to come and work with you to get either a thesis or a dissertation done, you are training them. You are giving them the skills that they need to become a scholar and an educator. And you have to bring your A game every day. And that was very important to me to work with my graduate students, to be able to give them the tools and the skills that they needed to go out into the world and either become an academic in the academy in a Research One university, or a teacher or an administrator. But you had to give them the theoretical tools, the analytical tools, the methodological tools to be a faculty member or whatever they wanted to do. So that was a big deal.
We wouldn't have had a chance to talk about this yet because it just happened out in the atrium, before we walked in here. But to see firsthand the impact on a graduate student was amazing. Do you want to just tell a little bit of? I mean, it was incredible.
I typically don't like to single out any graduate students in particular, but there's a gentleman here named Kurtz.
I didn't mean to throw you, but
Yeah,
it
no.
was so completely moving.
There's a gentleman here named Kurtz who, I think he had gotten some advice from other faculty in our department that maybe he wasn't. Where is Kurt? Is this okay where are you? Is it okay to tell his story? Are you sure? Okay. And I think he had gotten kind of the impression that maybe you couldn't cut it as a PhD student. And you came and you talked to me and you said, can I take a class and prove to you that I can? I said, absolutely. And you did, and you got into our program, and you got your PhD, and I pushed you very hard. And he's now a dean of sport management at Niagara University. Yeah. So we were in the atrium of the Carlson School of Management.
He's lovely.
And he just walked in, and I saw him, and I was deeply moved. Because he had the guts and the resilience to do it, and that's all I needed from him was that. And he did. Anyway, so back to other graduate students.
Just talk about the classroom a little.
Well, even before that, in terms of mentoring PhD
great,
students. So, and again, faculty will absolutely appreciate this. So a student says they contact you and they want to come and they want to work with you because of the research that you're doing or whatever, and you accept them. You know, we have high standards, and if they make the grade. And then you have, again, a moral and professional obligation to make sure that you do everything in your power to make them succeed. Anyway, and this happens all the time with new students. So they get here and they take, you know, a semester's worth of classes or whatever, and then they start to think about what they're going to do for their thesis or their dissertation, and they come and they meet with you and they sit down and they start to tell you about the most unbelievable methodological procedure that they figured out or some major statistical analysis, and they're going to design a study that answers every single question in the history of the universe, right? And I listen politely for about 10 or 15 minutes, and then I go, time out. What's your question? What do you mean, Dr. Kane? What is your question? Because your method should not drive your question. So you need to be able to tell me, or tell yourself, what is it that you want to know to advance the knowledge base in whatever area you're in? Why is that a unique contribution to that knowledge base? What is it that we will know when you're done? And why does that matter? And when you can do that, then come back to me. And so over the years, you know, one gets a reputation, I'm told. And so I started to hear from students. Austin's over there, among others. And I would say,
I feel like maybe Austin's like remembering what it was like to be on the receiving end of you.
Post-traumatic stress over here. And so then students started to make appointments to come and see me, and as they would walk into my office before they even sat down, they was like, I know, Dr. Kane, what's the question? What's the question? To the point where one of them finally said to me, you know, Dr. Kane, I think about this a lot, and I have to believe that on your gravestone, we need to etch, what's the question? I thought, well, that's good. I suppose, is there life after death? I have no idea, but that would be a good question to. But yeah, what's the question? And if you can answer that, you'll make a contribution.
And so you spent a lot of time in the classroom teaching undergraduates.
I did.
So for those of us who haven't spent our whole life in academics, just give us like what did you teach? Like, who'd you teach it to? Give us a sense of that.
Mostly, undergraduates who would be juniors and seniors, and graduate classes. Early on in my career, I taught a course which I developed here, Sport and Gender. It was a popular course, one of the first classes, as I said. I taught cross-listed with women's studies. Basically, I taught basically introduction to sport sociology classes, sport and society. I would teach occasionally a graduate seminar for PhD students about how to design a dissertation. But it was mostly a sport and society kind of course, you know.
So given how much time we spend together, I have been on the receiving end semester after semester of these amazing stories that come up, you know, just in the dailiness of us doing something.
Yeah.
About some student in some class, and they're absolutely delightful. So maybe just like pick a couple or pick one, like favorite classroom. Like I have mine, you know, like Jake, the Chicago Bears guy. But like, you know, like. Yeah.
Okay, well, I can talk about it. So, Leo. So my philosophy of teaching, and I absolutely mean this, I am always aware that students or their parents pay my salary. And you always have to show up with your A game, starting from that sort of fundamental building block. And so I tell them in the very first class that my philosophy of teaching is that it is their class just as much as it is my class, and that I want to create an environment where they feel like they can share who they are, and that I will learn from them as much as they will learn from me. So in the very first class, I asked them all to go around and say, tell us your name, your year in school, what's your major, why did you take the class, and what do you hope to get out of the class, and then what do you tell us a little bit about your sports background, what you care about. Now, I should say that I have set this up before I asked them to do it, I've done it myself. You know, I grew up in Bloomington, and I'm, Chicago Bears fan, Notre Dame, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, anyway. So as you might imagine.
Is it okay, though, to say, I mean, you're a Chicago Bears fan right up until the fact that they're dead to you.
They are they are
On an almost weekly basis
Right.
when they don't use the tight end over the middle appropriately. And then, I mean, it comes back around the next week, of course,
does.
but you can't kind of act like you're always a Chicago Bears
Well,
fan.
actually, this fits well with Jake, the Chicago
I'm just
Bears
saying.
student last year. So you guys are going to be very aware of this, that as students go around and say where they're from and who they're for and what their sports experience are, there's a pretty good, it's maybe 60-40 Minnesota Vikings, because it's usually in the fall semester, Minnesota Vikings fans and Green Bay Packer fans, right? And they share that. So last semester, there's a kid named Jake who says he's from Chicago, and we finished going around the room, and he says to me, excuse me, he says, so Dr. Kane, why haven't you said anything about the Chicago Bears? I mean, what's the deal? You grew up, you know. I said, as Shari just said, don't talk to me about the Chicago Bears. They are so dead to me. I cannot believe that they picked Mitch Trubisky. Really? Seriously? Don't even talk to me. Anyway, so he doesn't say anything, okay? Honest to God, for those of you who follow the NFL, last year, the Chicago Bears start winning every game with Mitch Trubisky as the quarterback. So every week, Jake comes into the class with more and more Chicago Bears paraphernalia. And he's like, come on, Dr. Kane, give us some love. And I'm like, you know what? Just wait until they've played somebody and then get back to me, okay? But they keep winning every single week. So now it's halfway through the semester, and it's she knows this story, and it's the midterm, right? You know, and he comes in, and he's decked out. He's got the Bears hat on and everything, and he turns in his midterm, and he's got this big smile on his face. And I said, Jake, what's the deal? And he pulls out his cell phone, and he has a screenshot of the standings in the division, and the Bears are on top. And he shows it to me with this big smile, and he goes, welcome home, Dr. Kane. Which I completely deserved. The punchline of that for me is that I am able to create an environment where students feel like they have that freedom to have that kind of an exchange with me. So that's undergraduates.
That's the best.
Kids say the darndest things, don't they?
So if we take like the big view, you know, from growing up to coming here, establishing Tucker Center, becoming the expert internationally on women and sport and gender, to teaching thousands of people like Jake in the classroom and mentoring graduate students and winning hearts and minds, and Emmy. She actually does have one. It's in her office.
I have an Emmy in my office thanks to Shari Lamke and Channel 2 TP2. They do fabulous work. Good job.
But it's a lot, you know.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a whole, full, meaningful life in there. When you just think about it, what are you most proud of? What's most meaningful in all of it to you?
Well, certainly the establishment of the Tucker Center, and you've heard how that happened and why it happened. I said at the reception that Jean Quam hosted before I came over here, there wasn't one single time at the University of Minnesota in 30 years where I went to somebody and asked them for some support, whether it was Bob as the dean or the provost or the president and members of his administration who are sitting here, to people in the graduate school, to faculty governance. Everybody at the University of Minnesota always said, sure, sounds like a great idea. How can we help? And so I'm very proud that we were able to build a record that gave us the credibility for people to support us in that way. So I'm hugely proud of the Tucker Center, which, as you pointed out, remains the first and only one of its kind. At the risk of sort of bragging a little bit, I'm proud of my scholarship because nothing to me is more rewarding, as much as I love teaching, nothing to me is more rewarding than starting with an idea and to figure out how to take that idea and design a study to collect data, whether it's quantitative or qualitative data, to have something that's methodologically sound on a topic that's relevant, that's theoretically based, and spend 2 or 3 years of your life with it, deeply immersed in an idea, and then collecting the data, analyzing the data, writing it up, submitting it to knuckle-headed reviewers and journal editors, and having that idea see the light of day. And as proud as I am of being a teacher, I can't tell you what it means to me to go to an academic conference and have a graduate student or a recently tenured or a young assistant professor come up to me and say, Dr. Kane, thank you for the work you've done. Your research has been the basis of my dissertation, or something like that. And that means a lot to me, because I feel like I've made a contribution that moves the needle in terms of how we think about women's participation in sport. And in 1993, it wasn't the hot, sexy topic that it is now, trust me, to be given that kind of credibility inside of a major research university. I'm really proud of that, that we moved the needle. And just related to that, I mean, it is true that I started out with a slide projector, with slides. I would literally sometimes take the slide projector on an airplane. And then of course, now we have PowerPoints and all kinds of fancy stuff, right? And I believe that the work that we've done, I look over at Nicole and others who've done research in this area, that the body of knowledge that we've created about how female athletes are portrayed, you can go back and look at how they were portrayed in 1993, and look at how they were portrayed in the Women's World Cup. We're not talking anymore about how sexy they are, how pretty they are, how their boyfriends are. We're talking about how gifted they are athletically, how smart they are, how tough they are. And you know who gets it? And here's the corporate businesswoman who gets it better than anybody else, better than we do as academics. Nike gets it. Because Nike has learned that if you portray women as highly competent athletes, it moves products, and it moves merchandise, and it moves hearts and minds, and those women did. And I think that the work that we've done in the academy helped move that needle, and I feel really proud about that.
Great.
Good job. Thank you.
So I have one more for you.
Yeah.
And then we're going to open it up to see what these fine folks have for you. It'll be okay.
Yeah, yeah.
So if you were starting today,
Yeah.
in the current context, the way the world is today, what do you think your doctoral dissertation would be on?
Oh.
What would your question be, Mary Jo?
What would my question be? Ooh.
Like, what space would it be in?
I think it would be some variation on a topic that I cared a lot about, that Dr. Lavoie and I published. It took us a while. And that's this whole notion of does sex sell women's sports? Related to these conversations, no matter, again, whether I was in the Iron Range or anywhere in the world, I would finish my presentation and show how female athletes were sexualized. And whether people were hostile to what I was saying or neutral or positive, the very first question always was, Dr. Kane, I get your point, and I either agree with you or don't, but whether you like it or not, sex sells women's sports. So, and that just deadened everything. And I remember driving home about 10 years ago thinking, how do we know that sex, I mean, I know the literature, there's no research that indicates that sex sells women's sports. And when I talk to sports information directors out there, do you have any data that show that when you portray female athletes in sexualized ways versus as highly competent athletes, that more people show up, that you get more corporate sponsorship, that you get more TV coverage? Where are your data? Well, I know that everybody just knows that. So I said, well, no, everybody doesn't actually know that. And so we worked, I don't know, a couple of years to design a study, which was the first ever, on whether or not if you bring in people like you all and randomly show you different images of women from on-court competent to off-court sexy babes. Which one of these kinds of images makes you more interested in women's sports, makes you feel good about women's sports? I get that the guys might want to buy the magazine, but they're consuming women's bodies as objects of sexual desire when they do that, not as real athletes. So we did a study, and we found that actually for the core fan base of women's sports, sorry to go off on this little rabbit hole here, but we found out for the core fan base of women's sports, which was women, young women and their moms and dads with daughters, they were highly offended by sexualized images of women's sports. And young men said they wanted to buy the magazine, but when I said, but does that make you want to go see them play? They said, no, it's not what they look like when they play. And so we had data that showed that selling sex was actually counterproductive. And we went all over and talked to sports editors and policymakers and parents, and that was the way we helped move the needle. So if I came back, I would want to do research that provides evidence-based knowledge for people to, because people ultimately are going to do what's in their own self-interest. So if you can show a sports editor, don't do this, it's against your interests, they'll start to do it. And they started to do it. So I would do that.
I don't think you're one of those people that's finishing their career having run out of gas.
No, I don't know.
All right, so we have, I think we're gonna, I have a little help with mics, don't I? Okay, so we've got some time to see what you all might want to ask that I didn't have a chance to ask. So if you could just raise your hand and then wait for the mic. Everybody and their cousin and uncle think they don't need a mic, but everybody does. So wait till you get the mic. We'll come right down here to Susan. Oh, we ready up here?
Dr. Kane. Okay. What is next for Dr. Kane?
Oh. You know, I'm not entirely sure. I want to travel. I want to do some volunteering. Shari Ballard, who just recently retired, had a great answer when she was asked about retiring and what it's been like for her. And Shari said, I get to say yes to all the things that I could not say yes to when I was working all the time. I want to play golf. I'm not a great golfer, but I love to play golf. Should I talk about the first kindergartners and first
Yes,
grade?
you totally should.
So, okay.
I was just telling Glenn Howard this today.
Okay, so I want to do a little volunteering, and it's related to, again, I grew up in a small private Catholic school, and I live in South Minneapolis near Lake Nokomis, and there's a couple of Catholic schools. And I would see, these girls that were in their little, plaid Catholic school girl uniforms. And I thought, I actually really like to read to little kids. And so I went to St. Helena's, and I talked to the principal, and I started reading to kindergartners and first graders. So I would come in 2 days a week, and I would read to them from books that because I don't even know what books. Anyway, so the teachers, so I'll tell the story.
Let me tell you little shorties about my dissertation.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so I really loved it, and it was first graders and kindergartners, right? So I had some credibility. So towards the end of the semester, I asked the teacher who loved it that I was there, because that gave her a break to go out and do one-on-one stuff with some of the kids. And she showed me this book that was about Cinderella, but it was from the perspective of the evil stepmother. And I thought, well, what if some of these kids have a stepmother? So I didn't really want to talk about the evil stepmother, so I kind of changed it a little bit, And, but they do, anyway, so I'm reading the story, and, but I'm a little anxious because I'm kind of changing things.
Because you're lying.
And they're smarter than I am, and they know, anyway, so at one point, I started to get anxious. I lost my way. And then I was like, okay, I can't remember if, Cinderella, and then the chariot turns into a pumpkin, and the horse they turn into I just got lost. And so then I said, and so then she's got to get home before midnight so that when the prince comes in the morning and kisses her and wakes her up. And they went, no, that's Sleeping Beauty, Dr. Kane. love cheering, but I can't believe I just told that story. It's a true story, and I didn't even have to embellish it.
Let's go to Susan.
Susan.
Oh, Mary Jo, I followed with such interest the women's soccer wonderful things that happened. Comment, if you will, about the difference in the salary levels that people are paid and how people make excuses for the differences in what professional women athletes are paid and professional men athletes are paid. And is it really just the box office? I mean, is there work being done on that? I'm just kind of opening this sort of area for your comment.
Well, first of all, there are obviously astronomical differences between, for example, the NBA and the WNBA, and I'm not suggesting that the women who play in the WNBA should get what the men get, although you can argue what they get is obscene. But yeah, there is this enormous gulf. But what the Women's World Cup showed us is that when the media and corporate sponsors invest in women's sports, there is, a huge interest in that. So yeah, there is work being done. It's just going to have to keep pushing and pushing and pushing. A reporter during this time period asked me, because they had done some research and showed that really the only professional sports league where the pay is equal is in tennis. And the reporter said to me, "Why do you think that is?" And I said 3 words, and he said, "What's that?" And I said, "Billie Jean King." And so you have to keep pushing. But I do want to say something about the Women's World Cup, which again, we are approaching the 50th anniversary of Title IX. Yep. What is so incredible about these women, and it's because of Title IX, and it's different from the 99ers, the women, Brandy Chastain and Mia Hamm. For the first time in our history, because of Title IX, we have young girls and women who grow up with a sense of entitlement to sports. And that is, has completely changed everything, because young girls, young women in my classes, you guys I know this, it would never occur to them that if they were good enough and willing to pay the price, that they would not have an opportunity. And that came through very loudly with those women World Cuppers, because they had a sense of entitlement that they deserved equal pay because they had earned it. And so when they were criticized for celebrating too much after their first victory, instead of being, "Oh my God, we're so sorry," the very first thing they did in the next game when they scored the first goal, what did they do? They trolled their critics and went, remember that? They did. And they didn't back off, and it is because they had a sense of entitlement that they had earned it. And talk about a moment when they won, and in the crowd spontaneously, the crowd chanted, "Equal pay, equal pay." And that's how far we've come because of Title IX.
Thank you. Come down here to Margaret, and then we'll go up here.
Well, speaking of Billie Jean King, I was avidly watching the U.S. Open, and I don't know if you saw the commercial that Billie Jean King narrated, but she's talking about what percentage of coverage is women on women.
Yeah.
And it was shockingly low to me.
Yeah.
The ad said it was 4%.
Yeah.
And, I can't believe that after all of this time, we're still at 4% of media coverage.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. And that's a statistic that comes out of some of the research that we've done. I don't know if you all know this, but 40% of all sports participants defined broadly are women. 43% of all scholarship athletes in this country are women. Now, 43% is a lot better than 0. And within that 4%, again, there's been this dramatic change in terms of how they are covered. And I do want to say this, because then people say, "Well, why is that, Dr. Kane? Why is it only 4%? Yeah, okay, thank you. Yeah, what's the question? Okay, so I'm going to say something that might be a little radical, but I think it's true. This is one of the most important institutions in our culture, in terms of economic culture, political culture, social culture, everything. And whenever you have an institution that has been deeply identified with one group, in this particular case men, because the definition of what it has meant forever has, to be an athlete is to be male. People in power are not so willing to just say, oh, excuse me, Justice Chudich, I didn't realize you weren't getting 50% of everything. Here. And so I think that the gatekeepers of sports are a little nervous about what it would mean when we actually do turn the camera on. And I have shifted over the years from the issue is not how come nobody's interested. I think the real issue or question is if the gatekeepers of media coverage just turn the camera on and let us have access to women's sports, the real concern is not that nobody's interested, but that far too many people would be interested. And then they would not be the center of the universe anymore. They'd have to share more power. Now, I'm not saying it's conscious, but I think that's exactly what's going on. It's about power and maintaining power. And nowhere can you have more power than in this ubiquitous sport media coverage. Now, can I prove that? No. But that's what I think is going on. So.
Let's take one. I think we've got one more in the middle here.
I'm concerned about women coaches leaving the ranks.
Yeah.
Any suggestions within the Tucker Center for how to nurture that, how to get them back, how to keep them?
Yeah, for those of you who don't know, again, related to Title IX, prior to Title IX, over 90% of all head coaches in women's sports were female. And today, nationwide, it's only about 43%. So again, as it was clear that we were that women's sports was gonna ramp up, men became interested in coaching. And I'm not saying that they shouldn't be, but they were. And so there's been a dramatic decrease in the number of women coaches. I have done some publishing on this, but the leading expert in the country on this very topic is none other than Nicole Lavoie, who has, and you can go online to the tuckercenter.org, and she has published with our students and her colleagues a series of some longitudinal data looking at and giving report cards to conferences and colleges and universities in terms of how many women they hire. And Nicole every year has a women coaching symposium to bring together women coaches from all over the country, the world, to figure out specific strategies to increase. But again, to go back to the point that I just made, if it's about power, women can be all the data show that women are just as qualified as men. But if it's about power, they're going to be all qualified up with no place to go because they're still not going to get hired. And so that's something that I worry about. I mean, I don't mean to be the black hole of negativity here, but yeah, the Tucker Center has done great work under Nicole about that topic.
Thank you. So we, I think we covered a lot of ground, didn't we?
Yeah, we have.
Okay there?
Yeah. Want me to read?
I think we started
grade?
tonight, and Nicole used the word legacy at the very beginning. I think legacy a lot of times can be most profoundly seen in the people whose lives you have influenced and people who have influenced you too. And we've got 3 of those folks sitting right over here who have worked with you very closely. I know they've influenced your life positively. And I think the opposite is true too. And I know they want to say a few things. So we're going to give them the floor for a minute before we wrap up. So we're going to ask Jonathan Sweet. Mary Jo talked about Jonathan earlier, who's a program associate in kinesiology. Been with Mary Jo from the beginning. You said right-hand man. The rest of us say brains of the operation. So we've got Jonathan coming up. We've got a former student of yours coming up. And Austin Calhoun, you're going to come up too. And Nicole, you're going to come up too, right? Okay? So why don't the 3 of you come up and take the floor, and we'll make Mary Jo sit here and listen to it.
Hello, good evening. My name is Jonathan Sweet. Some of you know me. I'm a program associate and staff support person in the Tucker Center for Research on Girls and Women in Sport. Though I have worked with her, for her, across the entirety of her U of M career, of all the things Dr. Mary Jo Kane has accomplished over her illustrious tenure, I have just one of many, one far-reaching story to tell tonight of the Kane.
Uh-oh.
Perhaps I can go so far as to say that I have been a colleague of Mary Jo since she arrived to the School of Kinesiology before and magnificently after she launched the Tucker Center. She has always treated those with whom she works with respect, if sometimes firm respect, and, and that includes me when I was first assigned to her back in the days of secretaries. One of my first experiences with her was when she was writing her first manuscript as a gopher, one of many manuscripts as she sought tenure in those early years. I had a newly minted U of M bachelor's in English creative writing. The assistant professor, Dr. Mary Jo Kane, had her yellow legal pad and blue pen and wrote longhand, depending on me to convert her pages of penmanship into McWrite format, since her keyboarding skills were of the hunt and peck variety. She would then take my printout and make vast corrections to it, bleed on it, as her many graduate students will understand. I'd then make the corrections in digital, then reprint and give her back her corrections with a new printout for cross-checking, and then the process would repeat, and repeat, and repeat.
Oh my God!
That first manuscript was 23 revisions in the making. Now that she's graduated to being her own typist and pecks much faster, I have no idea how many revisions she goes through. But you can bet that if 23 are not enough, then it's on to 24. However many revisions it takes to get it exactly right is how many revisions she will go through. As those of you who've read her journal articles, memos as department director, or reports for the university, or who have watched her on television and read her interviews in the New York Times, USA Today, Washington Post, and many other venues know, Mary Jo beats on the data until the thread that ties that data to an argument emerges. Further, she is peerless when setting up the logic of that argument, finally delivering it in impressive and convincing fashion. She could have easily been a defense lawyer or a respected politician, but lucky for us, her heart is where she landed. Though 25 years later there are automatic citation managers, Mary Jo and I still roll old school when checking references on her manuscripts. Me with the printed 5 to 6 page bibliography spread out on my desk. Mary Jo going through her two-sided stapled stapled manuscript with a ruler under each line by line, cross-checking her citations diligently. Duncan and Mesner, 2005? Yep. Cookie, Dicus, and Dworkin, 2012? Confirmed. Lavoie, 2017A? Check. Surprisingly, this is one of my most enjoyed experiences with her. We've done this for so long that for the last decade or so, I felt we really know what we're doing. And we both enjoy catching little errors, refining and refining until everything matches up and we finally satisfy APA style. Though sometimes it's Mary Jo's version of APA. The point is, as she's fond of saying, now I'm getting to it, Mary Jo Kane is exacting in all things. And that's what I felt, then increasingly understood as we forged on into version 6, then 12, then 16, and further, that I was in the presence of a master craftsperson's work, learning while watching the knowledge being born at her fingertips as she let her research and pinpoint-focused brain peel back what obfuscates how the world truly works and tells that story. On that day of publication, it was not work to have done 23 revisions. It was what was needed to make the understanding whole. She will tell you the process is exhausting, but also very, very fulfilling. Of all the things Mary Jo Kane has done, and of all the things I have to thank her for, this one thing is what I will remember her for most, that Mary Jo Kane is simply and indisputably a great writer.
Thank you.
Her honed skill, her consummate crafting, and that incomparable ability to reason and reveal is a gift to me, to her students, to her friends and colleagues. And as you all can attest, girls and women in sport, their families and communities, everyone here and in the wider world has benefited tremendously from the artistry of her science. Moreover, as others read her writing, they too will benefit and one hopes build on her canon. This is a legacy of which Dr. Kane can truly be proud. I know I am.
Brilliant, Jonathan.
I actually think it was 24 revisions, but who's counting?
Good evening. So this is a little awkward because I was told this was a roast, and so I have to rethink a lot of my remarks. Yeah, I know. As Dr. Lavoie says, that'll be for another day. So, thank you to the Tucker Center, for Nicole, for Mary Jo, for inviting me to say a few words tonight. My name is Austin Calhoun, and I am the Chief of Staff for Education here at the University of Minnesota Medical School, where I oversee the continuum of medical education. It sounds so exciting, and it is. From everything from admissions to our MD program to anatomy bequest, we like to say from womb to tomb. However, more relevant to this evening, I am a PhD alumni of the School of Kinesiology and a former and forever student of Dr. Mary Jo Kane. In fact, I came to Minneapolis, I came to the University of Minnesota in the fall of 2008 for the doctoral program and to be Dr. Kane's student. Just like she described, I was like one of those earnest kids that sent her an email and said, I'd like to work with you. I like sports, particularly girls and women in sport. And I was moving here from rural southwestern Virginia, and it might sound like it was a huge leap, but it was not, because I had been told by my master's advisor when I told him that I was applying to the University of Minnesota. He said, this is going to be great, because if you go to the University of Minnesota and you work at the Tucker Center and you study with Dr. Mary Jo Kane, you will be set for life. I mean, I don't even need to go on. Yeah, he didn't say. It was one of the best and most truest pieces of advice I have ever received, notwithstanding, of course, all of the advice I have received from Dr. Kane over the years. There are 3 exemplary pieces of advice or lessons that I credit to Dr. Kane and that I want to share with you all tonight, threads of which we have heard throughout this evening. These are not necessarily things that she said to me, here's a lesson, Austin, but nuggets that I learned implicitly by observation and that have served me well over the last decade plus. First, and we've heard this already, be prepared. Do not come into Mary Jo's office without your A game. I was crying thinking of the PTSD of her shaking me, asking, what's the question? She always brings hers, and that's sort of where you learn by example. So do not bring some B+ game into her space and not expect to get totally schooled. She's gonna bring it, and I know many of us have learned this lesson the hard way. However, learning this lesson has served me well, and it extends into my professional life to this day. Sometimes I find myself thinking as I'm preparing for a small meeting or a big presentation, what would I do if Mary Jo was gonna be there? And I do just that and then a little more, because, can never be too prepared. Number 2, the very worst words to hear while you're minding your own business are, hey, Dr. Kane. It is sometimes demanding and trying at times to be the figurehead for the first and only center of its kind, a former department chair, friends of former presidents and current presidents and athletic directors, and the idol of thousands of students. Where's the Jakes in the house, But the secret to this is that Dr. Kane built this wide and deep network of people intentionally, and you have to take her worst words with that proverbial grain of salt. This fame and notoriety, this loyal and admiring team of scholars, administrators, friends, and family is one of the strongest testaments to Dr. Kane's legacy and a brilliant model to follow. Even though that while modeling it, it means that sometimes you're gonna be in your sweatpants and you're gonna be at Target and someone's gonna be like, hey, Dr. Calhoun, and you're gonna be like, okay, good. And lastly, always have 3 takeaways. I don't know why this one works, but it does. 2 is not enough, and it's also a binary, so we wouldn't want that. And 4 is just too many. This is also why I have 3 children. Also, the word is key. I got a bonus in there. Also, the word is key because it's key. The 3 takeaways are not just random facts, they're distilled details or overarching themes. Mary Jo is masterful at this insightful framing of a thesis or a lecture, of an argument, just as we've seen tonight. So when Mary Jo says, in sum, the 3 takeaways are, you listen, you take notes, and you remember. It is an honor to share with you my 3 takeaways this evening. Be prepared, strive to help others so that they will bother you later, and always, always have 3 takeaways. I have been lucky to learn these lessons and more from a mentor to many, a friend to more, and a teacher to all. As always, Kane for the win.
Whew, yeah, I know. Those are 2 tough acts to follow. So, with the arc of anyone's life and career are 3 common threads. And this is interesting. 3. Not 2, not 4, 3. Time, money, and people. And Mary Jo's arc is no exception. And you've heard that throughout her comments and others' questions and comments tonight. And I'm certain that 27 years ago, Mary Jo did not know that having the right idea at the right time for a research center on girls and women in sport would become a reality due to the fact that she had the right relationships with the right people, many of whom you've heard about tonight and many of you who are in the room, which led to a monetary gift from Dorothy Tucker and the leveraging of that gift over 27 years, which has made the Tucker Center possible. Time, money, people. Mary Jo's vision, the Tucker Center, is considered the leading research center on girls and women in sport in the world. And it has inspired countless of our colleagues, including those in Japan, New Zealand, Canada, Australia, to open similar centers to strive for gender equity and to create social change for girls and women in sport in their countries. And when I travel and people find out that I work in the Tucker Center, the first question I get is, do you know Mary Jo Kane? As if the Tucker Center is some 15-story building and, with an army of researchers. Tucker Center is small and mighty. I've been around MJK since the early 90s, as she mentioned, first as a master's student, and then I left to coach at Wellesley College. And when I was at Wellesley College, I got a real passion for women in sport because it was a women's college, for those of you who don't know Wellesley College. And I quit my coaching career to come back to Minnesota to study with Dr. Kane because the Tucker Center was just getting started. And as a doctoral student, I would sit in the basement of Cook Hall and I would dream that someday I want to work in the Tucker Center. And that dream became a reality. As a colleague of Mary Jo's for 15 plus years now, when I say I do in fact know Mary Jo, the second question I'm often asked is, what's it like to work with the Mary Jo Kane? 24 revision. And I have many insights. There's much to share, but I will stick to 3 most important points. Number 1, first, Mary Jo is a great coach. She's a great coach. As you've heard, she loves football and is known for her armchair offensive coordinator and play caller for most notably her favorite teams, Notre Dame and the Bears. And when I got hired on my very first day to help Mary Jo run the Tucker Center, she said to me, and I'm direct quoting, I will never forget this. She goes, I'm giving you the ball. take the ball, show initiative, and run. So I ran immediately with a sense of purpose and urgency so as not to disappoint her or be benched. She's a great coach, and coaches are teachers, and she is an excellent teacher as well. Second, as you've heard tonight, Mary Jo has a gift of storytelling. Not just the kind you heard tonight, but letting data tell the story. Letting data tell the story. She knows how to say the right thing at the right time because she knows her audience. And it is her storytelling that has grabbed attention, amplified her advocacy, and elevated the fight for girls and women around the world. She can see the big picture. She can see the cultural narratives. She can block out the noise and intuitively knows what's missing from the conversation and what matters to people and what will make the most impact. She has something to say, and she knows how to say it in a way that gets people to listen. That is a gift. She is particularly good at taking a lot of info and distilling it down to one pithy, memorable soundbite, which is why she's highly sought after by the media. Because when they call her, they know they're going to get the money quote. So for example, many of you have heard, I'm going to give you her two most notable quotes. You can say it with me if you want. In 2 generations, we've gone from girls hoping there was a team to girls hoping they'd make the team. And now I hear other people saying, and they don't attribute it to her, and it really upsets me because it's just that good of a sticky quote. The second thing is based on her audience reception research that took decades for her to conceive and design and execute, and all the years of her thinking and the slideshow and the PowerPoint and the traveling and the questions. The soundbite from that is, sex sells sex, not women's sport. There are a lot of brilliant scholars in the world, but few have the ability to tell stories with data in the way Mary Jo does. Number 3, the last thing you should know is that if it isn't evident yet that Mary Jo expects and demands excellence from herself, from her students, from her colleagues, and in the Tucker Center, and when she is on task, she is laser focused with nothing less than excellence, which can be a little scary and exhilarating all at the same time. But the reason she expects excellence in small tasks like moving a comma or changing the font size from 10 to 10.5, or keeping the plant in the Tucker Center watered, to more weighty tasks like writing and editing. I have actually 27 drafts of the manuscript. Giving an interview to the national news outlet, designing world-class research, or collaborating on Emmy-winning documentary, or running the best research center in the world for girls and women in sport, she does it because she believes and lives by the refrain, to much is given, much is expected. As the arc of Mary Jo's career in the academy is ending, undoubtedly influenced by time, money, and people, the arc of my career intersects and is influenced by the same 3 factors. And I'm honored and privileged to be living my dream as the second director of the Tucker Center, and I'm here doing what I love and what I'm passionate about because of Mary Jo. She gave me her time and mentored me to be able to carry on her legacy. Mary Jo paved the way for being visionary, for telling the story, securing and leveraging resources to make her vision a reality, She no doubt has changed the landscape for girls and women in sport around the world. And for one person in particular, me, because she gave me the ball. And I'm grateful for that play call. Thank you.
Life, Dr. Bughead.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Most of you who know Mary Jo also know she loves to have the last word. The floor is yours, Dr. Kane.
Thank you, Shari. How about a great round of applause for Hubert? Well, I obviously I'm deeply moved and filled with gratitude, and want to thank obviously everybody here for coming. I was talking to a friend yesterday that I've known for many years who lives in Eugene, Oregon, and I was telling her about what was going to be happening tonight. And she said, you know, Mary Jo, it's kind of great because it's kind of like what it would be like at your own funeral. You get to hear all this. Thanks for the support. I appreciate that. Anyway, as Nicole just mentioned, I too have a set of guiding principles, as does Bob Brunix, and I'm sure many of you do too. And I have been guided my whole life by, as Nicole just said, to whom much is given, much is expected. And it is pretty clear that I have been given, you know, my cup runneth over. And as I've been thinking the last couple of years about that I was going to retire and get ready to do something else with my life, again, I'm not sure what, but it will emerge. I wanted to give back, and I certainly wanted to give back to the University of Minnesota. And not just to the University of Minnesota, but to all the people in the state of Minnesota that have supported me and the Tucker Center and the work we've done. So now that I know what the foundation is, I started talking with them and with my dean and members of the development office, and I decided that what I wanted to do was to honor the memory of my younger brother and sister. You saw that picture of us early on. Unfortunately for my brother David, my younger brother David, and my younger sister Janie, they succumbed to a disease that many people in this room have been touched by, and that's cancer. So they died far too young. And when I went and talked with them, I said to them that I wanted to set up my own endowment so that the director's position would always be around in perpetuity. And I've done so in the name of my brother David and my sister Janie. And one of the things that I want to do tonight is to acknowledge my family. And so, and hold your applause, but I would like, and they don't know this is going to happen, I would like to first acknowledge my brother's high school sweetheart. We're married how many years, Debbie? 40. And David and Debbie Kane had 3 children. They live in California, and their middle child is Chandler. So would Debbie and Chandler Kane stand up? And my younger sister Janie has a daughter named Jennifer and her husband Don, and they are also here tonight. I don't know where you are, but would Jennifer and Don please stand up as well? Oh, you're right here. Oh my God. Yeah. Thank you. And just my sort of final comment to, again, not just the people related to the University of Minnesota, but throughout the state. I said this last night at a gathering, and I've said this before. This could only have happened at the University of Minnesota and in the state of Minnesota, where there is this fundamental attitude. You want to talk about to whom much is given, much is expected. The Scandinavian ethic, everything about Minnesota is about giving back and doing things for the public good. So my sort of parting comment to all of you from the absolute bottom of my heart is Minnesota, hats off to thee. Thank you very much.
All right.
I love you.
Okay?
I'm fine. Thank you for coming.
Jennifer, all right.
That was great.
Thank you. Something about the, oh, go ahead. The reception? For all of you who wanted to stay around for a little while, we have food and drink out in the atrium and a reception. And again, thank you all for coming. It's meant the world to me. Thank you.